College Slam might seem like nothing special to you.
Heating up.
But it's a whole lot more interesting when you play as Michael Jordan.
Hey, party.
In fact, with this modified version of the game, you can play as the whole 1982-83 North Carolina team. And there are a whole ton of other classic teams to choose from. Believe it or not, this really adds a lot to the game. This is the game that College Slam really should have been all along, but why even bother talking about College Slam? I mean, it's just an NBA Jam Tournament Edition ripoff, right? Well, the history behind this game is actually pretty interesting. College Slam was released back in February 1996 on all the big systems of the time. It's basically NBA Jam Tournament Edition, but with a different skin and different teams. There are some interesting aspects to the original game, such as a shortened version of the NCAA tournament, and it features a lot of the interesting options that Acclaim's home versions of NBA Jam Tournament Edition also had. In particular, you can turn on hotspots and all sorts of power-ups. Now, the really interesting thing about College Slam isn't the game itself. It's the stuff that was happening behind the scenes. And it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what that was, since many people didn't really talk about it back in the day. So let's go back and take a look at the timeline first of all. Okay, the arcade version of NBA Jam came out in April 1993. This game was a smash success. Now, Midway had worked with Acclaim on home adaptations of all sorts of arcade games, you know, stuff like Mortal Kombat. And so, Acclaim came out with the Genesis and Super NES versions of NBA Jam in March 1994. In general, the Genesis version was superior. It's a little bit faster than the others. Acclaim also came out with a Game Boy version in November 1994, which was awful. And a Sega CD version came out in December 1994. That one was pretty bad too. Now, I keep talking about Acclaim coming out with these games. The truth though is that Acclaim farmed the programming out to a British company called Iguana Entertainment. That was pretty standard practice back then. Acclaim was really the publisher of the game, and different teams worked on the different versions. And that's why the feel for the Super Nintendo version was so much different than the feel for the Sega Genesis version. Meanwhile, Midway came out with the arcade version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition in early 1994. This is right around when Acclaim came out with the home versions of the first game. The first home versions of Tournament Edition came out in late February 1995. Once again, the Sega Genesis version is the best. It's faster and it plays more naturally. Later in 1995, Acclaim came out with a version of Tournament Edition for the 32X that was just awful. Acclaim then came out with the launch day version of Tournament Edition for the brand new PlayStation in September 1995, and this version was even worse. I seriously think that the PlayStation version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition is the worst game in this series without a doubt. Now comes the murky part. Around this time in late 1995 or early 1996, Midway and Acclaim had a falling out, and it's not clear exactly what happened. You need to realize that the NBA Jam name actually belonged to the NBA, not to Midway. NBA Jam's name came from the NBA Jam session, which was part of the 1993 All-Star Game in Salt Lake City, Utah. I believe the original idea was to get the arcade game ready in time for that event. However, it really didn't come out until a few weeks after the All-Star Game. And for whatever reason, Acclaim was able to convince the NBA to give it the rights to the NBA Jam name and to take those rights away from Midway. That happened in either late 1995 or early 1996. Now, if you're a fan of these games, you know that this is a problem. Midway understood how to make fast and exciting arcade games. Acclaim, on the other hand, had a tendency to slow things down in the name of being more realistic. It's hard to explain, but the arcade versions of NBA Jam just feel better. The home versions can be questionable, especially the ones made for the more advanced systems. And that brings us to College Slam. Now, I don't know the full story behind this game, but I suspect that Acclaim wanted to put out an NBA Jam style game every year in February for the home consoles. So this game came out in February 1996, that would make the third year in a row, and most notably, it doesn't have the name Midway anywhere. Okay, most of us don't pay much attention to the opening credits, but look closely at this screen. Midway is nowhere to be seen. Compare that to NBA Jam Tournament Edition on the Sega Saturn, which came out in December 1995. You can see Midway clearly listed here. So I'm guessing that the divorce between the two companies happened sometime between December 1995 and February 1996. And that's also probably why College Slam was not given a name that had something to do with NBA Jam. Of course, the concept behind College Slam actually isn't that bad. You've got a ton of different teams to choose from. You can play a 20-game season, or you can play in tournament mode. And like I said, the gameplay is basically identical to the home console versions of NBA Jam Tournament Edition. There are a few differences, though they're pretty subtle. For example, the players in the Super NES version of College Slam are a little bit bigger. The Super NES version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition has really disappointing graphics, to be honest. College Slam just looks better, and it feels a little bit faster too. But the controls are exactly the same.
Heating up.
Now the same goes for the Genesis version, which looks like NBA Jam Tournament Edition with a different paint job. But then again, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. NBA Jam Tournament Edition is a good game after all. It's not like Acclaim took a horrible game and then blasted it out to the world. Actually, the PlayStation version of College Slam is a lot better than its version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition.
Can you believe that?
NBA Jam Tournament Edition on the PlayStation suffers from crazy bugs that make it way too easy to steal the ball.
Great defense.
College Slam doesn't have those bugs. It feels a lot more like a normal NBA Jam game.
In his face.
The problem though is that it's really slow on the PlayStation.
In his face.
It took me 15 minutes just to play one half.
Oh boy! In your face.
In comparison, I can play an entire game of the arcade version of NBA Jam Tournament Edition in under 10 minutes. Anyway, the Sega Saturn version of College Slam also isn't bad. But the problem with the advanced versions of this game is that they're really boring. The Genesis version is better, in my opinion. And the Super NES version is probably the best of all. There's also this one for the Game Boy, but you probably want to skip this. It's really bad. When I was in middle school, my best friend had a Sega Genesis with College Slam. We used to play it all the time. I remember thinking back then that it was a ton of fun, but of course there was one big problem. The players didn't have names. For some reason, Acclaim decided to give the players really generic names. Now, the game does include an official Collegiate Products license, sure, but that only gave Acclaim the rights to use the names of the teams. And I'm not sure I understand what rights they actually got with that. Maybe the rights to the team logos? Now, I understand that some private schools might want to protect the rights to the school name, say a school like Notre Dame. But surely you could say North Carolina or Virginia in your game without paying money for it, right? Anyway, if they had a licensing deal just for the logos, they wasted their money. The problem here is that the player names are totally nondescript. So when I beat the tournament mode with Virginia, I usually played as point guard. I did this because he has the highest speed rating on the team. But wouldn't it be a lot nicer if the players had names, even fake names? There was actually a precedent for doing this for a college basketball game, which makes Acclaim's decision not to have fake names even stranger. Alright, this is NCAA basketball on the Super NES. Most people have forgotten about this game.
Steal.
It might look like just another early 3D game, but it actually plays really well. This game really showed off the capabilities of the Super Nintendo's famous Mode 7 graphics. Notice too that the players all have names. Fake names, sure, but at least they have names. NCAA basketball was actually listed as the best sports console game of 1992 by more than one gaming magazine that beat out the Madden series. Nintendo Power just loved this game. It gave it a score as high as Street Fighter II. Now, NCAA basketball on the Super Nintendo is not a perfect game, of course, but it really does make a difference when your players have names, at least some kind of a name. And I really think that that was the biggest problem with College Slam. Not having names made it feel like all the teams were more or less the same and that you were just choosing between different uniform colors. Now, if you want, you can go into College Slam and change the player names, but you've got 5 players per team and over 40 teams. You can sort of change the stats too, but there's a limit to how much you can do. And, well, it's just easier to use the default player names. But of course, it means that the game isn't much fun. And this point is where the gaming magazines in 1996 really hammered down on College Slam. GamePro noted that the Super NES game was basically the same game as NBA Jam, except without the recognizable characters. I thought that it was a little bit hard in its overall rating, but then again, this was a $75 game, as you can see. They called the Genesis version College Sham and noted that the graphics looked worse than the Super NES version. You can compare them for yourself. This is a clip from the Genesis version. And here's a clip from the Super NES version.
For 3. Yeah.
Anyway, the Genesis version also got pretty bad ratings, though at least it only cost $70 new. So think about that the next time you complain about video game prices. I mean, Europa Universalis 5 costs, what, like $60 to pre-order? That seems like a bargain compared to College Slam, which cost more. Now, the interesting thing is that there were all sorts of things going on behind the scenes at the same time that this game came out, and even the gaming magazines didn't really get the full story. I think this May 1996 GamePro article is the first preview of NBA Hang Time, the game that most of us think is the best game in the NBA Jam series. The big highlight, of course, was the Create-a-Player mode, which is still a really cool addition to the arcade game. But you'll notice that there isn't any mention here about the divorce between Midway and Acclaim. Anyway, NBA Hang Time really is an awesome game. I'll do another video about that game later. For their part, Acclaim came out with NBA Jam Extreme in the arcades in late 1996. The menus of that game look great, sure, but the game itself looks awful, especially when you've got the big head mode on. The camera keeps shaking and it's really hard to figure out where you are on the court. It's 3D, sure, but this is a really bad early 3D basketball game. Hang Time was simply better, no matter how you look at it. And in the meantime, the other home console versions of College Slam came out. The Game Boy version of College Slam was a dud, but I think we could have guessed that. This is the lowest score I've ever seen for an NBA Jam style game. The PlayStation version looked a little bit better, but then again, GamePro noted that it was the same game as NBA Jam. But at least it considered this game to be fun. And finally, there was this review of the Sega Saturn version with even more notes about the gameplay ripping off NBA Jam. Here the scores were a little bit worse, but still pretty positive. Now, it's kind of odd for me to look back at all of this, especially since I really have a lot of happy memories of playing College Slam. I mean, when we were 13, we thought this game was awesome. I thought that maybe I was just a silly kid back then, but then I played a modified version of College Slam that showed me what we were missing out on. Okay, this is College Slam Tournament Edition created by Baron von Lector. Baron von Lector is well known for his excellent Tecmo Super Bowl and RBI baseball mods. Anyway, in this version you can choose from some of the greatest college basketball teams of all time. Of course, that includes the 1982-83 North Carolina team with James Worthy and Michael Jordan. So now you no longer have to suffer through Dean Smith's boring isolation offense.
There goes Michael Jordan. It's Russ.
Instead, you can use Worthy and Jordan to dunk all over your opponents. And there are other fascinating teams too, including some teams that you might not know much about. The oldest team, of course, is the 1972 UCLA team with the famous winning streak. That means that you can play with a college version of Bill Walton. You've also got the 1974 North Carolina State team, which only lost once all year. This is one of those great teams that has largely gone forgotten over time. There's also the 1976 Indiana Hoosiers, and then the 1983 Georgia Bulldogs, who beat Jordan's North Carolina team in the tournament. And there's a lot more too. In addition to the fact that this game is free, the best part of this version is that it gives you an actual team and players to root for. So now when you make substitutions, you're changing actual players, not just the player positions. There are a few issues with the Super NES version of this game. Most notably, there are some slowdowns. But everything looks just right. The players look like the players that they represent. The stats are exactly where they should be, and the game honestly is just a lot of fun to play. In fact, I could see myself doing a few long-term projects with this version. All in all, this is the game that College Slam should have been from the beginning. It's an awesome mod, and it's something that you really should play if you haven't yet. And hey, maybe the idea behind College Slam wasn't really that bad after all.